Greetings to all. Our today's special guest, Dен Gemптон, a retired lieutenant colonel known as the U.S. Air Force's deadliest F-16 pilot. The highly decorated pilot known as Two Dogs spent 20 years in the Air Force, fought in the Persian Gulf, Kosovo, and Iraq wars. Mr. Gemптон, glad to see you, and thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Mr. Gemптон, you said that there are enough American pilots who are ready to defend the Ukrainian sky if the governments resolve their issues. You told Voice of America interviewer, "I will even go myself. I will be number one. You can count on me." You haven't changed your mind? Are you still ready to defend Ukraine in a full-scale war with Russia? And how is it possible?
Absolutely. And there are a small group of pilots like me that are also willing to do what we can for Ukraine.
You logged 20 years and more than 600 combat hours in the world's most iconic fighter jet, the F-16 Fighting Falcon, or the Viper, as pilots call it. How did you begin your career, and can you remember your one of the most dangerous flight on F-16?
Well, it's a big question. I started flying when I was 16, and after university was commissioned into the Air Force and then began flying jets and jet fighters. I can't think of a better way to have spent the following 20 years. Narrowing one dangerous mission down is sort of hard, but I'll give you one example. It was during the last Iraq War, and armored vehicles and tanks were moving out of Baghdad, Iraqi tanks. And all I was told was they needed a visual reconnaissance of what was going on down there. Despite all the systems from space and everything else we have looking at this, they wanted me to go look at it. And it was, I had to get down under a cloud deck to do it. And there were lots of surface-to-air missiles and anti-aircraft guns. It was very near to Baghdad. So I came in over a lake to the west of Baghdad to avoid the SAMs. And I found out it wasn't just a few armored vehicles. It was actually two divisions of the Republican Guard, maybe close to 500 tanks and 20 to 30,000 infantry. And of course, they all saw me about the same time I saw them. And for a wild 30, 45 seconds in there, I thought they were going to get me because everything was blowing up around me. It was reflected off the clouds underneath me. Bullets are going past, surface-to-air missiles are being fired. I'm still not sure exactly how I got out of that, but obviously I did. And it's not one of those things you think about until after it's over. You know, you come back, it's all done, you're on the ground, and then it hits you. What could have happened? I'd have to say that was probably one of my most frightening missions.
As I understand, you witnessed firsthand some of the most historical moments of the United States Army services, including helping to hunt down Saddam Hussein during the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003.
That was a good day. We got word that he was trying to escape from Baghdad with some members of his family and friends, and there were helicopters waiting for him right in Baghdad. We still hadn't taken the city yet, so it was still very heavily defended, and they wanted us to go in and destroy the helicopters so he couldn't get away. And that's exactly what we did. Again, it was one of those missions where it seems like everybody was aiming for my nose. Bullets everywhere, surface-to-air missiles, you name it, they were being fired at us. But we found the three helicopters and destroyed them with Maverick missiles, which is an air-to-ground missile, and the 20-millimeter cannon.
In an interview with the Radio Liberty, Major General Patrick Ryder, U.S. Department of Defense spokesman, said in response to a journalist's questions about red lines surrounding Ukraine's use of F-16 fighter jets that the West sees Ukraine using these aircraft only within its sovereign territory. How do you think Ukraine could use F-16 for strikes on military targets inside Russia or not?
I think if Ukraine gets F-16s, they can use them any way they wish. General Ryder, with all due respect, is a public affairs officer. He's not a combat officer. So having him discuss red lines is sort of ridiculous, especially in this context. I mean, you're getting artillery shells from Czechoslovakia, and you're getting other military supplies from France, Britain, the United States, Holland, lots of other countries. So are you only allowed to use them inside of Ukraine? Yeah, I don't think so. What about Russia? They're getting supplies from North Korea, China, India. Are they just restricting their use to inside Russia, you know, in the name of international relations? It's a ridiculous notion. You use the planes and the weapons any way you have to.
An F-16 squadron with long-range munitions could strike Russian targets on occupied territory, including the Crimean Peninsula. It could hit Russian warships in their ports or across much of the Black Sea. Will F-16 make the occupation of Crimea more achievable and well thought out?
Yeah, they can, with the right weapons, and again, I'm not sure what weapons are coming with these F-16s, but with the right weapons, all of that is possible. We have weapons that you can use from a great distance. We also have weapons that are equally good right in close if we have to do it. As far as the Crimean Peninsula goes, there's a couple of ways to make that very difficult from the Russians. The Ukrainians know this, so do the Russians. So you don't need me to talk about it. But the F-16 is quite capable of hitting all those targets that you mentioned. First, though, you have to control the sky over the battle area, and that means air superiority, which means we go shoot down the MiGs and the Sukhois.
For example, what weapons it can be for F-16?
For hitting targets on the ground?
Yeah.
Oh, well, there's a joint standoff munition. There's a joint standoff air-to-ground missile. There are lots of glide weapons and weapons that have motors and different types of guidance that can be used depending on the environment and the target. So again, what we do is we look at what the target is, what you want destroyed, and we pick the best weapon for the time of day, for what the target is, for what the threats in the area are, how much time we have to use it, that sort of thing. And there's a wide variety to choose from, so I have no doubt that we'll pick the right one.
You also empathize with the importance of surface-to-air missile systems and modern anti-aircraft weapons for the urgent defense of Ukrainian airspace. So as I understand, this combined with piloting F-16 would turn the airspace over Ukraine into a no-fly zone for Russians.
Yeah, well, look at what's happened to them in the past, right? When you've tried to attack and they start losing airplanes, they pull the airplanes back, okay? You can replace lost equipment fairly fast, so can the Russians, but they can't replace a pilot that's taken 30, 35 years, you know, to get to where he is. That's much different. So they're very careful about how and where they deploy their pilots. And if they're faced with an integrated air defense system from Ukraine, which means long-range Patriots working with shorter-range systems that you already have and anti-aircraft guns in conjunction with fighter aircraft behind them, then they won't be able to come into your airspace and do whatever they want, which means you can control your airspace, which is what you want to do.
As you said, no one has ever won a war from the air, and reminded, but you can lose a war if you don't control the airspace. While you felt confident that you could get a MiG-29 off the ground and back on it, you pointed out that controlling all the weapon systems on an F-16 is a different story altogether. What's the harder thing about mastering an F-16?
Well, I think the hardest thing is sort of what you just said. It's, we start doing it from the very beginning, so we don't have any habits to forget. Your pilots that are here and other places getting trained, they're very good pilots, and I have no doubt, from what I hear, they're doing very well. But they've had to forget about some habits that they had formed while flying MiGs or Sukhois, and learn the F-16 method. I don't want to go too deep into what all that is because everybody across your border is listening to this too. But it's not something that your pilots will have a problem mastering when they're being properly instructed, which they are. And then they can turn around and they can teach your next generation of pilots, so forth and so on. And along with that comes the tactics and other things that they're learning in conjunction with the weapons and the airplane. It will keep this from happening again to Ukraine, which I think is the ultimate goal after you win this war.
And Tom Richter, a former U.S. Marine pilot who has flown the F-16, also said, if you ever walked up and put your hands on a MiG-29 at an air show, and then walked right over and put your hands on an F-16, you can feel just from the outside how the F-16 is highly engineered. It is a prima donna, and it's very sensitive and needs high maintenance.
I don't think the F-16 is a prima donna. I've flown it in desert conditions, bad conditions, sandstorms, rocks, and everything else. So that's sort of overstated. It's not that delicate of an airplane. As far as your pilots, again, I think the biggest challenge that they've faced is having to learn a new mindset, how to think about using this very advanced airplane and all these very advanced weapons, because that changes how you think tactically to destroy and kill your enemy. I think that, along with their previous experience flying combat in Ukraine, is going to be a tremendous asset for your Air Force and for the war. I think that once they are in place and the airplanes are in place and flying, everything will change for Russia and for Ukraine. And you're right. You can't win a war from the air. I say it, other people say it, it's true. But you can, in fact, lose a war if you don't control the airspace overhead. There's only so much that you can do from the air. You need to work in conjunction with the troops on the ground, the tanks, the infantry, the special forces. We call that combined arms. And we're very, very good at it, in my opinion. I mean, look at the last war in Iraq. That was the fourth largest army in the world. And we went through it in less than a month, and they surrendered. So it's a very valid concept, and that's something that your pilots are also learning as they are instructed in the F-16.
One factor that sometimes gets lost in public discussions about military aid to Ukraine, particularly regarding highly sophisticated platforms such as the F-16, is the vital roles played by various people on the ground to keep these aircraft and their weapons systems operating safely and successfully in a high-intensity combat environment. In general, what is needed to operate this fourth-generation fighter, or in general, F-16?
Well, it's a very good question. Any fourth-generation advanced fighter is going to need more electronic and avionic-related care. Because with fourth-generation fighters and above, real fourth-generation fighters, I'm not talking about the Russian and Chinese stuff, the avionics, the power systems, the radar, all those things are very highly integrated, and it takes very, very specialized knowledge to be able to keep them working and running. And I know that effort is going on right now in your Air Force, along with, procuring the F-16s. Your Air Force is smart. They know you just can't buy the airplanes and put them on a runway and start flying them. You have to have all the support equipment that goes with it. And it's the same for your own MiGs and Sukhois to some degree. I mean, they cannot fly without constant attention to the engines, to the avionics, the flight controls. These are all things common with all modern fighter jets. So it's not that big of a change, I think, for your maintenance men to do this. They just have to have the right equipment and right instruction, just like the pilots.
Regarding the difference between the F-16 and Russian fighters, you had critical comments on the Su-35. While acknowledging that it looks impressive with its beautifully painted exterior, you stated that it's not really that good of an aircraft. Why do you think so?
I think what I said was I don't overestimate it. All right, it is not an airplane that's going to go out and sweep the skies clean of all opposition. The Russians, as you know very well, are very good at propaganda, and they want everyone to be frightened of them and their equipment. And I think after 2 years of the Ukrainians kicking their butts all over, your country and out of your country, the world doesn't see it that way anymore. The Russians would still like everyone to believe that their airplanes are far superior and their missiles, are death rays, like that hypersonic missile that they talked about so much that turned out to be, really nothing to worry that much about. I don't overestimate the Su-35 and the Su-27s. I don't underestimate them either. I've survived too long in combat to be arrogant about it. Okay, I understand what they can do, and I know how to beat them. So for me, that's what it takes, and those like me feel the same way.
On March, Ukraine reported the downing of more than 10 Russian warplanes within the last 2 weeks, among the highest Russian Air Force losses since the early days of the full-scale invasion. Hope that this will continue, but what do you think about this operation?
I drank a toast, a vodka toast to the Ukrainians after I heard that news. And again, it goes to prove what I just said. These people are not 10 feet tall. You've captured enough of them to know that. And you've shot down enough of their planes and destroyed thousands of their tanks. They're hardly invincible and indestructible. So I think as long as Ukraine can continue to be supplied with what it needs, you'll win the war. Your courage isn't going to give out. I don't think the Ukrainian people will ever give up. So it's a question of continuing to be supplied with the equipment and the weapons that you need to continue fighting.
Mr. Gempton, thank you for supporting Ukraine, and thank you for your professional thoughts. Dен Gempton, a retired lieutenant colonel known as the U.S. Air Force's deadliest F-16 pilot. Guys, subscribe on our YouTube channel, like this video, and see you soon.